What's up, y'all? So I've had a lot of people ask lately for advice and tips on what they can be doing better. I feel like recently, a lot of the time I've been saying to people that they need to work on their lighting and shading, and kind of what I mean by that is a few different things, but it's basically taking a player or a cutout from looking like your generic photo that just came out of the camera to something that fits with the graphic background that you have, something that pops and it doesn't just look like a regular, photo. First, we have this cutout. So this is your starting off image, and there's been no editing except for I brightened him up a little bit because it was a raw picture, so it needed to be brightened up a little bit to even see what it's supposed to look like. So that's basically the most basic edit you can have on it. And then to go from here, I double click on it or go up to filter and do camera raw filter, and then I mess around with the highlights. And what I want to do is make sure the highlights are to a point where they're not blown out on the player. So you want to, I usually end up taking the highlights down so there's not any blown out parts, and so there's more detail coming out. And then for the shadows, I bring those up because that's going to bring more detail out of them. Yeah, you can just see more detail in the darker areas, but I'm not going to bring it all the way up because I don't want it to look just like gray and bland. I'm just going to bring it up a little bit there. And then after I do that, that's when I bring up the texture, which is going to really bring out some detail somewhere up here. Just depends on the type of photo as well. If it's a low quality photo, you probably can't bump these as extremely as I did, but this is a high quality raw photo, so I can manipulate all these basically as much as I want to. It's not going to come out looking too terrible. So the texture I bump all the way up. The clarity, a lot of people just blast this, but that's not what you want. That just makes it look kind of gross, and it takes away some of the color. So sometimes I'll bump it down depending on what I'm going for. Usually in sports stuff and sports cutouts, I bump it up a little bit, but just not too much because I don't want that gross, faded, super high definition, whatever look. So after I bump those two, I go to sharpening, and then I bump that up to around 80 or 100. It's about the feel though. You got to do it based off of what the photo looks like. So you want some detail, but you don't want it to get too grainy. So with lower quality photos, things are going to start to look messy earlier, but since this is a high quality photo, I can kind of push the boundaries on all of these sliders. So anyway, I'm gonna hit OK. That is basically where this other one is. For the sake of time, I'm gonna go back and just make this back the way it was. And then so basically once I edit it, I turn it into a smart object, therefore it doesn't have the layer mask anymore. So this is the edited photo with no layer mask. And then so we have more details showing because we've lightened up the shadows and we have darkened the highlights a little bit, not too much. You still want the most white thing in the cutout to be at peak whiteness, I guess, if you can say that. And you still want the darkest areas to be just about black. But we've pulled out some more detail in both of those areas, I feel like. And then now that we've done that, we can kind of manipulate the details more. So how we're going to do that and get to here is using a lot of curves, selective color, that sort of thing. So the next thing you can do is you can put an Unsharp Mask on it. So how you do that is you go up here to filter and go to sharpen and then Unsharp Mask, and that will pull up this box. And you'll have to mess around with these also. Again, it depends on the quality of the photo. You can basically just make it look more detailed and more crispy. So with both of these down, it looks bland again. And if you bring them up, I think I had it at 3 and 55 or something like that. So you can just see in his hair, his skin, his eyes, it just looks like there's more detail, but it doesn't take away the color like the clarity slider does. So it just looks a little bit more crispy. And now that we have that, we can start to mess with curves layers. So the first thing I did was just used a brush, brightened up his eyes. So if you zoom in here, I basically just used this curves layer, bumped up the highlights, and then or basically pulled up the brightness on the whole photo and then painted it onto just his eyes. So without it, they look like that, and with it, they pop a little bit more. So you don't want to go too hard with that. It can look really weird really quick, especially if you're a beginner. It's kind of hard to pace yourself with doing all these things to the extreme, but I think that looks okay. It just kind of makes them pop a little bit. And I just did it to the colored part of his eyes. So just like a circle right here basically is all I did. Then I added another curves layer, and this is a brightness layer, and just like softly painted on like some of the places where you would be able to tell better if he was like flexing and didn't have a sleeve on. You could kind of do it better, but you can basically just like highlight his like arm in certain places to make him look like more muscular or more defined. There's not much to do on here because like he's wearing a sleeve, and so there's like not much change you can make to that. Once you paint on the highlights, then you can get another curves layer, pull it down, paint in the opposite areas to make him look more defined that way. So basically this is bright, and then this is dark, this is dark, this is dark, and this is brightened up right here. This is brightened up over here. This is brightened up. So it's just a little bit, not too crazy. And then I used a selective color. Again, this is just something you're gonna wanna like mess around with. You can tell what looks good to you. I would go through basically all these. The ones that I don't usually use too much are these last 4, but these 3 are like very cool if you wanna give it a specific look. But usually if I'm just trying to edit the photo just to look like a good photo by itself, I'm just messing with like these up here. And again, you just mess with all these sliders, tweak them to sort of fit the look that you want and fit the background color, but I wouldn't change it too much based on the background color. I would just make the photo look good. So then I added black and white layer, and that I just painted on over the whites of his eyes to make them look, I mean, people, or I've just heard it said that like eyes look healthier and better if like the eye whites are white. So you want to make them a little wider, but you don't want them to look unrealistically like bright and white. You want them to maybe have like a little bit of color, which is what I did here. I just added back a super faint blue, and I didn't bump up the brightness too much. I think to me they look pretty realistic and they just look healthy. They don't have like a red yellow tint, which doesn't look good. So then I added on an inner shadow and a drop shadow. You can just mess around with these two. I try to keep it like soft for the most part because like there's no really harsh light hitting him. So the concept of this is like there's a lighter area coming from the top right, and then it's darker from the bottom left. I have this soft white inner shadow set to linear dodge add over here that's like hitting him from the top left or top right. So that's what that looks like. It's very faint, but it makes him look a little bit more like 3D. And then a drop shadow behind him that's also kind of faint. And you can change that just depending on like how close you want him to look to the background. So I could drop the size down, I could drop the distance, and it makes him look like he's like right there in the background. You can make it darker, obviously. For me, this is the look that I went with. I didn't want it to look like he was super close to this background. I just kind of wanted to make him look 3D and like he wasn't, you know, just a part of the background. So that's why I added this like sort of softer, not super dark shadow behind him. And then so with these layer, this layer right here is another inner shadow layer that I made an inner shadow and I made it yellow, and I set it to linear dodge add, and then I right clicked on effect and you can hit create layers. And so if I did this right now, it would make this inner shadow and this drop shadow into like separate layers like this thing is, and put it above it or below it, you know, wherever it's supposed to go. So I did that, and then I added these two after that. But this is basically just an inner shadow layer that I made a separate layer, and then I painted away the parts on like the bottom and left sides of him to make it look more realistic. So it looks like he's just getting hit from the top right with a yellowish light. And then this is just a soft brush of yellow that I brushed on him where the light would be hitting him. Obviously, like, you know, once it gets to right here, that's where it's like starts to fall away. I feel like most of this area he would be getting hit, like maybe over here he wouldn't be because his shoulder pad would be in the way basically, and his head would be in the way. So if the light was coming from up here going down this way, there wouldn't be much light hitting him from like this side. So I had to wipe all that away. That's what I did with this layer mask. That's what it looks like before I wiped it away, and that's what it looks like after. And then I added the color lookup thing that we use for all of our cutouts, which is basically just, you can go up here to adjustments and use a color lookup, or you can kind of create your own color lookup by doing a selective color, which is that thing I showed you earlier with the different sliders. So I decided to use the same one we always use for apps. And then I used another soft brush. So if you go to brush, make it as soft as possible, and then you lower the flow down to like 5%, you could paint light on like very gradually. So I did that like over here on his arm. The light would also be hitting there. It would be hitting like sort of on his hand, on the football a little bit. And then I erased everything like past the arm. So I don't want it to be on the body right here because that's like a darker spot and the light wouldn't be hitting there, but it should be hitting his arm. So I painted that on and then used the layer mask to brush away. And then on a lot of these, I take the slider right here and pull it down so that it's not affecting the darkest parts of the cutout, because that looks more realistic. And most of the yellow stuff is, well, this one's not, but a lot of them are set to screen. On that one the opacity is lowered. And then these are just folders that have these lens flares in them that I made. So you can use a brush that makes lens flares and then put them on, like, you know, this is like obviously shiny, his teeth are shiny, so I just like put little ones right there and right there. That one's the more obvious one because I wanted that one to stick out more. And then this is just a layer I always use of like basically a big soft white brush up top and then a sort of shadow bottom left side, and that is just laid over top of the whole thing. So yeah, we have color, lookup. So the last thing I did was, if you hold Control, Shift, Alt, and E, you have to be clicked on the top layer that is visible. So this one's not visible, that one's not visible. This is the last layer that's visible. Control, Shift, E for Windows, and then that makes it a stamped layer of the whole look you have. Go up here to Image, click Apply Image, Merged, RGB, Multiply 100% opacity. Then I just convert that to a smart object. So I set that to screen, and then I go to blur, Gaussian blur, and kind of mess around with it. It's basically just supposed to kind of like give it a glowy look, but you don't want it to look super messy. You just kind of want it to like pop a little bit. So I feel like around 4 or 4.5 is where I had it, and then you just paint that in where you want it. So this is it before I painted it in. Then I just create the layer mask, invert the layer mask, and then start painting in where I want the light. And I wanted it to be hitting, I wanted there to be like glowiness around all the yellow that's hitting him, and then like up here where the harshest light would be hitting him. And so I painted that on with a soft brush with a low flow, so I could just kind of like brush really where I wanted it to be. And that's what I came up with. So that's without, that's with. Not much, but just adds a little more pop. From now on, if you DM me or comment and say what can I work on, and I say lighting and shading, photo editing, this is what I mean by that. It's nice to have your cutouts looking like they fit in with the background and the graphic that you have, and it's good to like have them pop off the page and just look very detailed and crisp instead of bland like this. So anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you learned something. Let me know if you have any more questions, and check out the rest of this playlist to see the steps involved in making a graphic, and I hope to finish it up pretty soon.